I'll pass it.
I put a print out of an email from Councillor Carpenter.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, thank you. I saw that. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful Tuesday morning, and this is the Senate Transportation Committee. And our first order of business this morning is transportation program, miscellaneous changes of law related to transportation. We're going to be talking about public transportation, I believe, zero fare public transit. And we have a group of folks with us this morning. And who would like to lead off? First one I have is John Moore. Would you like to take?
Yes, good morning, Chair Mazza and everybody. Thanks for the invite. John Moore, Green Mountain Transit for the record.
You could have taken the bus over here this morning, you know?
What's that?
You could have taken a bus over here this morning, you know what I mean? Have a nice ride.
Beautiful morning for a bus ride. So want to quickly just talk about the zero fare transit funding as included in H736. As a quick reminder to the committee, the GMT board approved budget, in addition to using one-time existing fund balance monies, is balancing our FY23 budget with restarting fare collection in Chittenden County, as well as moving forward with some service reductions that I presented last week, which total about 5% or so of our overall service operated in Chittenden County. And I just want to highlight again that if the funding in H736 was provided to GMT, not only could we continue the zero fare service on our local routes, we could actually double that money by maximizing the use of our available federal funds. And with that, our board would have the flexibility to prioritize how to best use those funds, which would likely include the elimination of our proposed service reductions. We could also look at other one-time capital improvements, such as improvements to our fare collection system. So there's really a good opportunity from GMT's perspective to create a 2-for-1 scenario where we can achieve the standalone benefits of the continuation of the fare-free service while avoiding our planned service reductions and offsetting some of our cost pressures, most notably from the crippling fuel prices that we're currently paying. And just to put this in practicality terms, under our current planned budget, going back to fare collection, we're projecting about 1.6 million in passenger fares. That for each dollar we collect from the passenger would offset $1 of our operating expenses. If we were to receive the funding as included in H736, each dollar in state funding would actually offset $2 of our operating costs, again, by being able to match our existing federal funds. So we really see a great opportunity to maximize the investment in public transit. And I'll quickly just remind the committee that per state statute, it is the state's policy to maximize the use of federal funds for transit services in the state while trying to maintain existing services. So again, we strongly support the language in H736, as does many of our community partners. And we hope to provide the best public transit service that we can to our communities that we can sustainably afford, and feel very strongly that the funding in H736 would achieve that.
Thank you, John. So I did actually hear from another one of your board members today, Chapin Spencer. We received some emails, and another board member, Austin Davis, caught me in the hall, and they put something on the table that seems to make sense to me from my previous work on the board, that I read the current language from H727 to be somewhat restrictive in that it requires that you maintain zero fare service throughout the whole year. The points that I think are eloquently made by Chapin Spencer as well as Austin in a sideway conversation is since I have have such great confidence in the board. You have some very bright individuals there that long serving. Would you be also supportive of language that was more flexible, so that if you and the board deem halfway through the year or partway through the year that some routes might not want to maintain zero fare, so that you can again maximize and leverage the dollars to be used elsewhere? I'm just not concerned, but I wonder if it'd be better to give you the flexibility with this $1.4 million to use it for fare boxes and not bind your hands to maintain zero fare transit throughout the entire year.
Sure, great question, Senator Chittenden. I am sure that our board would appreciate as much flexibility for these funds as possible, so that they can consider local decisions and needs in how they use them. There is a strong support for continuation of zero fare, but we certainly have other needs in terms of service maintenance and expansion. And that flexibility would certainly allow us to use these funds in the most productive manner.
When we talk about zero fare, does that mean everything zero fare? All routes, everything? John, when we talk about zero fare, we talk about all routes, everything is zero fare?
So the funding in H736 is designed to allow GMT to continue zero fare on our local in-city Chittenden County routes. Again, with the ability to double that funding amount through our federal funds, our board would be able to prioritize other needs, which could include continuing zero fare on our commuter routes when balancing that against our other needs as an organization.
So you're talking about Burlington to Montpelier would be zero fare?
Well, that would be something that our board would consider. Under the funding provided in H736, that would only include our in-county routes, so our local routes that do not leave Chittenden County.
So the reason why I like the flexibility option is that maybe you want to have during the week when in the high frequency routes, those can be fare free to get the operational efficiencies of not having to deal with a dollar, but maybe so that you could increase your weekend service, which Chapin Spencer spoke to. If your weekends, it cost $1. I just sense that many riders need the service as much as they appreciate the fare free. That's why I'm advocating for flexibility. As the board gets creative, if weekday service routes were fare free, but weekends, so that you could maintain more frequency and let people get to work at a better time. That's why I'm advocating for the flexibility, so that the board can be creative.
Yeah, I think that would be much appreciated. I think there's certainly a valid debate on how investment in transit can be best spent to provide the public good, if that's through fare-free transit or charging a fare and expanding services, or a combination of both. So that flexibility would certainly allow the GMT board to consider those factors.
Mr. Moore, how much funding would you need to restore the temporary service cut? So the cuts to service that was made recently.
So the planned service reductions have a cost savings of about $250,000.
Thank you.
But giving this flexibility, if there was this flexibility, the board could decide at some point that maybe they would charge fares on some routes in order to use that money to restore that service, if we had more flexible language.
And were these fares free forever?
No, just because of COVID.
Because of COVID, since COVID.
I just don't get it. I just don't, why are we just fighting so hard to be fare free? I understand, and I know in the conversations I've had with you, and I lean on you because you are there, and I don't, but I know some of the inner city routes, are advantageous to remain fare free, but at some point in time, we've got to stand on our own. I just don't get it, and especially when you want to look at the rest of the state that doesn't have any transit whatsoever, and at some point in time, we're subsidizing that. When we don't even have the option, and the vast majority of the state of free transit, we don't even have transit. So that's where I get a little bothered.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'll try to make the case for fare free, but I would welcome Ross or other experts on this to strengthen but the case is that it will actually increase or get more people out of their vehicles so we could decongest the roadways, which has the climate benefits and also less traffic that I know nobody enjoys. So there are studies out there that show fare free encourages more patronage as well as addressing the climate crisis. There's also the operational issue. If you are bus drivers in those busy routes, getting the change and doing the change actually costs you money, and then processing the change. I think you spoke to that the last time you were in, John, that they actually cost money to handle money. So that's another benefit of going fare free. But with that, I'd love to hear others with more intelligence on this to make the case for fare free transit.
Yes, Ross?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ross McDonald with V-Trans, Public Transit Program Manager. There's no question fare free is now in existence in half of our rural routes, and 2 out of our 7 providers operate a fare free system before COVID. Before COVID, 50% of those routes were fare free because they had the support from the resorts or the hospital or the communities they were serving. There's also a component here which speaks to the COVID ongoing issue, which is the prevention of contact, physical contact between our essential drivers and the riding public. New strains come through. Anytime we can maintain those barriers, those air filtration systems, and not have that exchange could keep those drivers on the road for more miles. For John and Urban, that's certainly the discussion that you've had, that John has testified on the rural side. We will not be using state funds to cover the fares that we would otherwise generate, because we have COVID relief funds still in our coffers to operate and to pay for those operations for those routes at fare free. So last year we had a $7.6 million line item for operations. This year it went to 9.5, and I was expecting that to cover some of the increased wages we were seeing, some of the gas costs increases that we thought may occur, as well as investing in some of these demand response services, microtransit not being least of which. I do want to point out, while every town certainly does not have fixed route public transit, every town does have demand response services. So if you are elderly or a Medicaid patient or a person with a disability, no matter where you are in the state, you do have access to public transit for essential services. And it's a constrained program, but I do want to keep making that point that there's no community that has no public transit options. So really that's where we are. FY23, we should be fine with no fare free. That's $570,000 total pre-pandemic revenues that we would generate through all of our fares on half of our rural routes. And moving forward with maybe a 70%, 80% ridership, we're probably looking more at a $400,000 nexus or delta between our approach now with fare free FY23 and reinstituting fares. My last point here is just that at the end of the day, when we run out of our COVID relief funds in FY23 going into FY24, we may be best served by putting this back into the decision-making process at the local level. We have disparate organizations with different sizes, different approaches and partnerships. And if fare free makes sense in one area, but not in the other, that level of latitude as a program manager may be worthwhile to ensure that we are allowing for the latitude and flexibility, at the regional level.
Questions for that?
Ross or John, do you know can you remind me what's, oh, here it is, section 16, zero fare. Good one, okay. And then what would GMT or you, Ross, think if we had language with that some of the funding be used to restore service that was cut temporarily but is planned to be permanent?
John?
Instead of a complete flexibility saying, here's some extra money so you can restore those routes.
So from GMT's perspective, we have a board approval process. Anytime we have planned service reductions, first step of that is 2 public hearings, one tonight and one tomorrow night, both in Burlington. Based on public comment and feedback received to date, I think our board will have a lot to think about. And while I can't speak for them, if there was money available to avoid the service reductions, I don't see any scenario where they would turn that down.
And from VTrain's perspective, if you were to make those funds available to VTrans versus GMT, we could continue to work through the application process, and that would give us the latitude to provide enough funding to maintain fare free, to avoid those service cuts, and maybe at the end of the day, that leaves some left over for the other providers, capital, operations, or admin, preventive maintenance, those types of things. We could also, in addition to the $800,000 that we are now planning to provide to the GMT urban division, we could increase that amount to the point that is negotiated between John and VTrans and their board. And then any leftover funds then could be applied for capital or statewide considerations. Just throwing that out there.
I'm not sure I followed that, Ross, but I'm relatively new around here. So if you just proposed that we would take this money and we would put it to VTrans and then GMT would have to get it from you, that would create more flexibility with federal matching. And John, I'd look to you. Is that what he just proposed? And do you have concerns as the GMT manager to route the money through VTrans?
Sure.
Well, we have an excellent relationship with VTrans, and they've always treated us very well, and we would have no concerns working through that process if that's what the legislator decided.
That also create the flexibility that I was talking about previously so that these funds, okay. But that seems to make sense to me.
I mean, isn't that kind of what it says now? Or?
Go ahead, Ross.
Oh, sure. The current budget, as proposed, includes $4.108 million in state funds, and that's for capital and for match on their operations, which includes administration, preventive maintenance, and other activities. So if those funds were to increase the 4.1, then just at the end of this month, we get the applications from all of our providers. And that's when we start really trying to continue the services and look for opportunities to improve services and facilities. This would just be, additional funds for these specific considerations, and then maybe others if at the end of the negotiation period, they didn't need the entire amount that's captured in the proposed legislation.
Yes, all right.
I don't mean to dominate if other people have things to say, but Senator Pershlik,
You're doing it, that's right.
Senator Pershlik's point, I definitely hope the services get restored, but I'd be just as reluctant to have language in here forcing GMT to do so. Instead, I trust that board, and I don't know if you know Chapin Spencer, he's the Director of Public Works of Burlington. I trust that board to find the right path as we continue to adapt on the tail end of this pandemic. So I'm just looking for flexibility that doesn't mandate zero fare and doesn't necessarily mandate service restoration, but supports public transit to meet the needs of the community. That's right.
My only fear is that we're setting the future always being zero fare. I hear the story, it costs money to collect money. Well, we can't use that attitude. That's a tough one because it costs me money to collect money too. But so I hope we're not setting the future forever that this is going to be zero fare, because you got to figure out a way of some small charge of being able to collect it without saying, well, it costs money to collect money. I mean, if we could that attitude, we can go with that with a lot of different services we provide. And so that to me, there's a critical time. I understand that. And I want to help people take a bus that's convenient. And again, if you take bus service, it has to be convenient. You're not going to take it unless it goes to your job at a specific time, comes home. But I just don't like the statement that you can never do it because it costs money to collect money. And that bothers me because I'm in a small business now and everyone is using credit cards. I mean, 90% of the customers are using, they don't use money at all. And so I got purchases of $1.10 for a cup of coffee and they use their instant cards now, whatever they are. And I'm very ignorant on that stuff, but anyway. So, and I have to pay a fee, but that's the way you do business. You've got to be able to have some money in the game. And I don't know if it's $1 or $1.50, or I don't know I'm not that familiar with the bus rides, but I just don't want to shut it out forever because I think that's a bad road to go down. Because I think a lot of people will be willing to pay a small amount. But what a small amount is, I don't know. Whether we can't charge 50 cents is too ridiculous. Maybe it's $1, maybe it's $1.50. I don't know the standards. I'm not that familiar with it, but I've heard that over the years that, well, you can't collect because it's bothersome to collect money. I don't like that statement, and I fear about that. But I don't know when to do it. And this is a critical time for the pandemic that we've gone through. Elaine, I think, Elaine, you're next on the list. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you for your time today. We'd just like to say, again, we continue to support GMT and their efforts to spend down those federal dollars to the best of their ability, because that match actually makes more revenue flow through GMT to support them to, not reduce services if possible. That's all of our standpoints here from VPTA's perspective. So I'm just curious if you guys have any additional questions for us at this time.
Go ahead, Senator Chip.
Talking too much today.
Good discussion.
You know more about it.
Right, you're familiar with it. You've been on a board, and I
Right, sure. We appreciate the knowledge.
I'm open to learning more. I just.
Maybe, John, if you would feel comfortable speaking to Senator Mouse's last point about what it would take to standardize the fare boxes to address the operational efficiencies, to reduce the exchanging of dollars and making change that bus drivers have to do as they are, picking up passengers along the route. So I get it. You don't like the argument that you don't want to, it takes money to collect money. But I think with buses, it's even more awkward, especially when there's inconsistency on those. So anything you'd offer to that point, John, would be welcome.
Yeah, great point. And I certainly understand Chair Maz's point as well. We will need to do some more research on the cashless technology, which certainly creates some of the same benefits of not collecting a fare in terms of speed of boarding and on-time performance. My understanding is that the Federal Transit Administration still requires a cash fare under any circumstance, so we would still need to offer that. And I do just want to quickly point out that, at some point in the future, GMT may need to consider right-sizing our service. There's certainly lingering COVID impacts in terms of ridership. We think it's premature to do that. We're back to about 85% of our pre-pandemic ridership on our local routes. And we think this is the time to incentivize ridership, not to detract from it by reducing service. There is language in H736 that there would be a ridership report at the end of the fiscal year. So the legislature could see and GMT could see what are the actual return on investments of the fare free and hopefully the continuance of all of our service. In addition to that, there is also a federal funding bonus program, which is essentially based on productivity and ridership. GMT is a high functioning service now. We meet 4 out of 6 of those bonus criteria, which is worth about $800,000. If we could achieve 2 more, or at a minimum, keep the bonus monies that we already receive, that would also go a long way in our financial stability. So, our main goal is to increase ridership. We think the best way to do that right now, especially with the pandemic impacts, is to continue fare free and maintain all of the service that we can. But we also fully recognize that if these COVID impacts continue into the future, that we'll need to restructure and right-size our agency, and we'll certainly be willing to do that. But again, we think it's premature, and we should be focusing our energy on getting more people on the bus, not making it less convenient at this time.
What would we be discussing if there was no federal monies available at this time? How would we handle this situation? Because we know federal money is going to dry up sooner or later. What would
Well,
we
so
do?
for GMT, our COVID relief dollars will be dried up at the end of FY23. We will have budgeted and used all of those. But over the last couple of years, we've been able to bank our normal federal funds in place of those COVID relief funds. In addition, with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, there'll be a 35% increase to GMT's urban federal funds. So I don't believe the federal funds will be a problem in the short-term future. It's going to be the limited non-federal match that we have available to draw those down. So I think that's where we want to focus our energy.
The answer you might be looking for, Senator Mazza, is they could either assess the communities more, so send South Burlington a larger bill to pay for it, or right size, as he talked about, their fleet, reducing service, getting smaller buses. And that's, I think, is what I heard you say, John, is on the table a year out from now. You don't think you want to be there yet because we are coming back from the pandemic, and you're optimistic that ridership should get restored as we, based on the numbers we're seeing so far.
Correct.
Jim Moulton, go right ahead. Join us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mazza. Jim Moulton, Executive Director of Tri-Valley Transit, serving Addison County, Orange County, and Northern Windsor counties, and also Chair of the Board of the Vermont Public Transportation Association. I thought it might be helpful for me to address, Senator Mazza, in particular, your concern about fares over the long term. I think one thing that may not be well known is that there's no transit system in the world that pays for itself through fares. Even New York City, the largest in the world, runs a deficit. It cannot cover all of its expenses through fares. So it really is a community benefit that relies on governmental support and investment. At the same time, that does not mean that there shouldn't be some quote unquote skin in the game. And I think that's in part what you're talking about, Senator Mazza. And we found, when Ross spoke earlier about roughly 50% of the rural routes in the state pre-COVID were charging fares. We are one of those systems that had a mixed system. Our local routes were fare-free. Our commuter routes charged a fare. You had actually intuitively spoken about the commuter runs, the link runs for GMT. Did they make sense at some point in time to be charging fares? I think, I could probably speak for all the rural providers and say, the much more obvious routes to charge fares on are the commuter routes. It's a longer distance. You can still have one interaction between rider and driver, or rider and fare box, but get a larger sum of money. The equivalent might be, in one of your stores, the difference between a $1 sale or a $20 sale. You have one transaction, but you're receiving a lot more money, and therefore the cost of each transaction is lowered. We had found historically that charging a relevant amount of money on the local routes, the slowdown in service, which upsets reliability, provides less service because you have to plan more time for each individual route. There's a lot of downsides to charging fares on the local routes, and a lot of upsides to having a fare-free system. I would also say that Advanced Transit, the bi-state provider for the Upper Valley, has had a fare-free system for decades on all of its routes, and has actually been one of the most successful in building ridership over all the years. Certainly some of that has come from the growth, population growth and business growth, economic growth in the Upper Valley, but it has also been really good for them to promote ridership. And I think we want to remember that all the benefits that come from growing the ridership. Senator Chittenden spoke, previously about, greenhouse gas carbon emission benefits of doing that. The other element about local routes is they tend often to be more of your lower income riders who have less means in their own personal budgets for things like fares. So, I think ultimately, it's up to us as transit providers to find the right balance between all of those priorities, whether it's greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's serving lower income folks, whether it's reliability and frequency of service, as well as the budget considerations. And so, our perspective is that this remains the right time to provide fare free service in all of our routes around the state. And we really want to support from the rural side this effort to keep GMT fare free for the foreseeable future. I think the flexibility that both Senator Chittenden and Ross spoke about are important elements, and we would support either way to create flexibility for GMT as an individual system, or VTrans benefiting potentially the rural providers as well. I do see at some point in the future we would very likely be looking at when and where do we reinstate fares, what makes the most appropriate decision. I think there is value to the idea of skin in the game, and we just need to define what that looks like at the right time in the future. And I'd be happy to field any specific questions that you might have. Thank you.
And I'm just going to echo Senator Mazza's point, Mr. Moulton. You say that you're all about taking money or this or that, but you minimize the impacts of what $1 million is really, or what $254,000 is to where we have to cancel service. Yeah, I get it that we have to subsidize transit throughout the world. I get it. But $1 million is $1 million is $1 million that taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for if you have the ability to collect that money and to help mitigate some of the expense of running a business. People, the whole world isn't all about free, and people will pay for a service. You ask the people that we just stopped this service, would they pay more if you could restore that service? And the overwhelming answer is the small poll that we conducted is yes, they would pay more if that service was restored. So I really have a problem where we are just really trying to battle to put more monies back into the systems, and yet we keep on going back to, well, the amount of money that we collected is minimal, it's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It is a big deal when you're cutting service and you're trying to run a business, and it's not important that we collect any money.
Senator, I apologize if I gave you the impression that I was minimizing the importance of fares. It wasn't my intent to do that. As I said, we have charged fares in the past. We have seen that as an integral part of not only our financial situation, but also the concept of, as I said, skin in the game of folks, contributing to the services that they're receiving. I do think we're faced with some unique situations right here, in particular for GMT. In this instance, the federal funds exist. And so the $1 million is not just $1 million, it's actually leveraging another $1 million of federal funds. And I think that allows GMT to avoid the service cuts that I think everyone in this, my perception is that everybody in this collective room doesn't want to see. So, but at the same time, I think this moment in time is not necessarily the right moment in time to think about reinstating fares, if that, in an ironic way, forces GMT into reducing service and, reduces the potential ridership. I would also say that, coming out of the pandemic, we have absolutely seen an enormous backlog of riders that have been putting off essential life services, a lot of medical care, and the need for folks to access service has gone up. And I think even though we might want to feel and do feel that a lot of the pandemic is behind us, there are still lingering effects of that. And I think anything we can do to support those with lower means through this transition period is also important. I am not avoiding the idea of, at some point, should we be charging fares again? I think that's a legitimate question. And as I said, we have done that ourselves throughout the years. I'm just want to make it clear that I think right now, this is an important point in time where the investment from the state and the legislature in this for GMT could make a tremendous difference of leveraging these federal dollars that are available and serving the community without the reductions in service.
Thank you.
Yes.
So we had a conversation this morning with another senator about the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Action Plan, and I did read it. I read it late at night. Can anybody refresh my memory on if that calls for the state supporting public transportation more so? Is this part in the field of some of the recommendations of that important document? I guess you all read it as closely as I did as well. So I need to go back to it, but I don't know if you have any recollection, but it seems like this is in line with some of our very important climate goals. And I'd love to know how it fits in by supporting public transit from the state level.
Is it general?
Senator, I can say that the Transportation Innovation Act does include the concept of free public transit, at least in fiscal year 23. It doesn't necessarily speak to the longer term, but it does reference the continuation of zero fare in fiscal year 23.
Yes, Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have been part of those conversations. VTrans has several staff members to committees and subcommittees for the Climate Council. I sit on the Just Transitions committee as partial staff for that group. There have been certainly a lot of discussions on what is public transit's role to address the climate action plan and the reduction of greenhouse gases. Very early on, we were able to point to our public transit policy plan and other studies that show that the way that our built environment is, we have the highest percentage of people living in a rural area than any other state. It's not Montana or Dakotas or those things. And as a result, it really does limit the abilities for public transit service to get everyone to where they want to get to when they need to get there. What we are trying to do are test different program approaches or service approaches, whether that's microtransit, recovery and job access for our demand response. The zero fare component is something where we've kind of found ourselves kind of midstream on a pilot that we didn't anticipate, which is for the fourth time since I've been here considering and studying fare free. This particular instance has occurred during a period of time when we are fare free. And so through FY23, we'll be able to gauge what were those impacts, what are those surveys, not only from the sample survey that we have, but all of our providers surveying their riders and getting their take on the balance of more service, reduced cost. But for us, that's kind of where we are. I also speak to the electrification process where at least we can contribute to the climate action plans by moving forward with our electrification of the fleet so that whenever we grow service where it makes sense or people come onto the service because it makes sense, financial or environmental, they'll be part of a cleaner operation. And so those are the ways that public transit's really been involved in those discussions to date. And there's a meeting later today about the clean transportation standard, and we'll continue to participate and provide as much information as possible.
How many electric buses is there in your fleet now? You have a lot of them or a few?
We only have a few on the road, Senator Mazza, maybe 4 or 5. We have funds and procurement processes for 18, and we plan to apply for another 10 in just next month. And so that would bring us up to 28. If we're able to scale up in that way, another 10 or 15, 20 per year, depending on vehicle size and cost and specs, could get us to, a 25% electrification rate in the next 4 years, maybe 5 years, something like that.
If you put them side by side with a diesel bus, an electric bus, what would the comparison be roughly today in today's world? Is it a great amount or small? I mean, I know diesel fuel has gone crazy. I understand presently, but
sure. Right now with the current specs, 86% of our routes could be served with one battery electric bus replacing one diesel bus. That's a good place to start. The upfront costs are about double that of any particular ICE vehicle going to battery electric with the charging infrastructure.
Okay.
Over the course of 12 years, we expect to recoup a lot of those funds through the preventive maintenance, no lube oil filters, and savings in that regard. But that upfront unit cost is significant. But the feds and their low and no grant program is paying for 85% of that total unit cost, as well as the charging and facility upgrades.
Good, thank you. Yes.
But we do have some buses, electric buses. Don't we have one going around Berlin? So how many are active? Last couple of years, we've had 2 or 3 going.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had Proteras, those 2 vehicles that were first delivered on the road. We have 2 Gillig buses that are 35-foot, large, heavy-duty 12-year buses in Rutland. We expect more to be delivered between now and June to Advanced Transit. Some of the smaller buses we've had to wait.
Ross, how long have the ones in Rutland been operating?
About a month now.
Just a month.
Yeah,
The
those were
Proteras-
with months.
The Proteras in Burlington did go through the winter. They've been for a whole year.
They've gone through the winter. There have been issues. Those diesel heaters on the roofs, maybe a little faint of heart to keep us warm, keep the cabin warm. But we're working with other manufacturers like a Latenda in outside of Montreal that is producing a battery electric bus with an insulated cabin that is a 12-year vehicle that could replace a lot of our cutaways with a much better layout and battery electric option. Very dynamic industry. We're seeing better options with every procurement process. And that's why we held up on the smaller vehicles until we had a set of specs that could replace a diesel bus 1-for-1.
Changing weekly, I guess, the trend. I mean, it's they're making progress every day. They'll be longer. Yes.
Do they have to use quite a bit of diesel to keep those buses warm with the heaters on top, the diesel heaters?
I don't know. John, do you have a sense?
No, they're only 10-gallon tanks, and over the course of the shift, it's not using the full 10 gallons. So it's relatively minimal in the grand scheme of things.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, go ahead.
I guess I'll make one is that a guiding principle for me is to tax what you don't like and subsidize what you do. And I like public transportation to address our climate goals, to also make it cheaper, cost of living for those that are at least at advantage so that they can get to and from work and to our population centers, and also to reduce traffic. So this has my support to get more money to public transit. As for where it comes from, I want to tax the senators from Northeast Kingdom a little bit more. That's my standing joke. But I mean,
South Burlington should be taxed more. They get more benefit from bus service. So if there's anything you can do to raise the rates in South Burlington, I know a council person.
Yeah, we're already ready.
He would vote for it. So
they already get about $500,000 from SB every year. But so that's, I think, the real conversation years to come. Assuming they're the same senators sitting around the room, is I think we need to talk about sustainable, rational assessment to subsidize public transportation from the right sources. I'm sorry to go for that joke again, Senator Ames. I was just trying.
Well, it's always informative to find out a lot more about public transportation. I'm glad you all appeared this morning. Thank you very much. And,
Thank you very much.
We'll listen to the House tomorrow. They're coming in to go over the House bill, so we'll continue our discussion. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gene, you can take us off live right now, and then we'll go back on later.
What's a joke works for me? I just keep.
Senator Mazza,
Come in earlier if we want her.
Oh, she can come in earlier?
she
Cindy,
can
you
come in now if you want.
Oh, might as well do it now.
If you want to.
Sure, let's do it now. I appreciate that. Thank you. This is talking about the $1 million. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of poor job the first time. So let's see how it changes.
They took it out, right?
As of right now, I'm gonna spend on snowball chance of hell back yet, but whatever. Let's give it one more shot. We've said that. And it hurts me, but
Are we ready?
Where are those electric chargers? And also, what's that? Electric chargers for electric school vehicles.
I'm waiting for her to join. I just sent her.
Okay, that's all right. Just give us a shout.
just
Thank you.
I think there was a lot more to it. They just got centered on that. Something like the Titanic.
House has it out.
You think Senator Chitman sells buses or district?
Well, I was gonna talk more about the heaters on top, that burning the dirty diesel. I at least wanted to find out whether they had the additive that was going in there to help clean up the emissions, because there's an additive that.
Oh, there's a heater on top of it.
Yeah, there's a diesel
Oh, I
heater
didn't,
on
oh,
top.
I didn't know that.
Working
Separate.
about 10 gallons per day to keep the bus warm.
Could you buy it? Can you use vegetable oil? Go around, pick it up from the restaurants.
Yeah.
and drive
I
around?
don't hear anybody doing that anymore. There was a time when
You have a plant,
there
right?
was a plant that people were going around.
You got one, right?
Plainfield,
Yeah, right
Black
there.
Bear Biodiesel.
When you're left, you're going into town from.
Yeah, he collects it there. He actually he's from a family in Rhode Island that has a fuel business. And they do all the refinery, the vegetable oil in Rhode Island, so he transports it back and forth. And he sells some just pure vegetable oils, because some people have converted their
Right.
trucks to it, but very few people.
Used to nice, you could smell,
Bitch used to
smell
run.
French fries.
Yeah, they used to run it around. You see what he used to run? He had that, olive green, the thing he used to, he had some smell like
Yeah.
French fries.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. I knew it was common, but I haven't heard any more about
Yeah,
that.
it's pretty rare. It's got a lot of winter crops.
Ms. Hawkins joining now.
Okay. Are we, okay, Cindy, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
I thought you'd be out snow machining today or something, you know?
Well, actually, I had planned to come in person today, but I had a small surgical procedure yesterday, so I am staying home.
Oh, good, as long as you're doing well, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, there was some concern about the grant for the snowmobilers, and would you tell us about what's happening? Give us an update.
Sure. Yes, thank you, Senator Mazza. So for the record, my name is Cindy Locke. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, VAST. And I'm in here today to talk to you about the funding that was taken out of the budget by House Appropriations. I was listening last week when Senator Kitchell brought it to your attention that I had reached out to her. And so I just wanted to start with that this was not the administration. Something was mentioned about the administration seeking proposals. That's not our case. I actually went to the administration myself. They did not reach out to me. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Excuse me.
Cindy, tell us what the money's for, because I think there's a really big misconception of what the dollars are for. And so if you could do that, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Senator Ingalls. I'll do that. I did send over a 2-page document to Jeannie, and I would like to go over that. I thought it would be easier than just me talking about it. So do you all have that in front of you by any chance?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the $1 million is for our grant and aid program. And we run a very prudent budget and funding process. We have about 21,000 members. And we also, we receive money through the trail passes, as well as Vermont registrations and a small part of the gas tax, which is $148,000 a year, which is in statute. The majority of our funding goes back to the clubs to buy and repair equipment. And so and this equipment is very expensive. And every year the increase is between 5 and 7%. And there's an increase to the equipment every year because of the price of steel and other things. So in our fleet, we have 145 power units. Now we have almost 5,000 miles of trails in the state of Vermont. These power units are all run by volunteers. We have thousands of volunteers that manage our trail system, and we couldn't do what we do without them. 106 of these power units are the large ones like you see at the ski areas. So the big piston bullies like Stowe has, or the Tuckers, we call these our class 1. 46% of our class 1 groomers are 10 years or older. 34% of our class 1 groomers are 20 years or older. These class 1 groomers cost between $150,000 and $350,000 a year. So with this grant and aid program that we have, there's a graph. And what I wanted to show you in this graph is the amount of requests that we get from clubs to either buy new equipment or to fix their equipment. It's all in one pot of money. So if you look at, for instance, if you look at 2018, we had $992,000 worth of requests, and we were only able to grant out $361,000. In 2019, we had over $1 million worth of requests, and we were only able to grant out $232,000, and so on. The two columns that are to the right that says number of requests and number of grants, there's some dollar signs in there. Please ignore the dollar signs. That's a typo. That's just a regular number of the amount of requests that we had and the amount of grants that we were able to give out. So a grant, again, could be to buy a brand new piece of equipment, or it could be to fix a piece of equipment. The other thing I'm sorry.
So are all the groomers owned by the local clubs, or does VAST own some?
We do not own any. They are all owned by the clubs. And we also have to guarantee loans for clubs that go to buy a new groomer if they need help. There are grants available to help. If you're familiar with the USDA has a grant program, but it's only, it's a 50% grant for most regions of the state, except for the REAP zones, which would be the economically challenged areas. So primarily the Northeast Kingdom, where they get a higher percentage. We grant out 60%. So we do not give out 100% grants. We give out 60% grants. So the clubs are really responsible a lot for raising their own money or taking a loan out. They are paid $12 a mile to groom these trails. So they're not making a lot of money. They're not banking a lot of money, and we're giving them everything that we can give them. I also noted that for a nonprofit, we run a very lean organization. We only run our administrative side at 23%. Usual nonprofits are flip-flopped. Their administrative side is about 77% or 75% to 25%. So we run a very lean operation, and administration is not just payroll and benefits. It's everything. It's our building. It's our trucks and trailers and snowmobiles that we have a few of. It's our attorneys. It's insurance. It's everything. So the other thing I wanted to note is that I don't know if you're familiar. You probably have talked to Commissioner Snyder about the recreational trails program sometime in the past, but there's a federal program called RTP that the state of Vermont goes to get money to give to trail organizations or recreational projects around the state. The state of Vermont actually uses our grooming mileage to pull down all of the motorized and multi-use monies that come to the state of Vermont. Some of that money does, because it's designated only for motorized, does go to VAST or VASA or both of us, but it's also used by the Department of Forest Parks and Rec for all of their multi-use projects. So all of the state parks and things like that use our grooming to pull down that federal money to use for themselves. Lastly, the only thing I wanted to point out was that, because I figured that this question would come up, like, well, why now? Why are you guys asking now? Are you going to come back and ask again? And I really wanted to point out that that part of the reason that we're in this pickle was because of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. We put $3.5 million of snowmobile money into that multi-use trail that's owned by the state. And it was pointed out by this committee many, many times that that is a state resource. And that's why we really couldn't get any other private funding. Because people just looked at it as it's like a state park. It's a state resource. Why should we help pay for it? We can use it. So that was over $3.5 million that VAST actually put into building that trail. And believe me, we knew, we didn't know what we were walking into when we walked into it. And I wasn't here. Senator Mazza, you were around, and that there was a lot of things that we didn't understand. We didn't think it would have to go through Act 250. It ended up that it really wasn't supposed to go through Act 250, but that was a $150 million mistake that was made. And, and we worked graciously with ANR to get out of it. But anyway, so that's why we're in this pickle. It's not because of mismanagement. We're not just coming in and saying, well, you know, there's all this great free money out there right now. Let's put our hand out. I mean, this is a serious thing for VAST. You know we bring over $500 million of economic impact into this state every year. And it's important. And the last thing I wanted to say was that we have over 9,000 landowners. The majority of our landowners are not snowmobilers. They're cross-country skiers, they're snowshoers, they're people who like to have a groomed trail on their property so they can use it. And we sign those trails so people know that there might be someone walking, there might be a horse being ridden on the trail and so on. So anyway, so that's why this money is so important to us. And I just really appreciate you allowing me to come in today to talk about it once again, because this industry is so important. And like Senator Ingalls has brought up before, this because we're statewide, we impact areas that don't have a lot of other resources. They don't have businesses that are supported other times of year that are just reachable by snowmobiles, you know, people wanting to snowmobile in those regions. And so it's really important to those small businesses too.
Cindy, when the Appropriations Committee took this out, were you there? What was the reasoning behind it all?
Senator Mazza, I don't know. I was not there. They did not reach out to me. I was not able to testify. I did testify in House Transportation. And when I came to you the last time, I think Frank mentioned to you that I wasn't sure why I was coming to you. So I thought I was coming to you actually to talk about the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. So there was a miscommunication, and that's why I wasn't prepared like I am today to talk to you about the seriousness of this issue.
And I think in fairness, Cindy, that caused the situation that we're in right now, just being upfront. This is a lot better presentation than what we heard before. And it makes, just quite frankly, to me, and I'm hoping it does to my board members, it makes a lot more sense than what we had heard before. So
I would just like to know what the appropriations.
Yeah.
Was it money? Well, I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
money, but was it that's where they thought?
I think, and I'm gonna talk out loud here a little bit, Cindy, because I want you to hear this. I just think that last time this really was. The conversation got centered that this $1 million was for electrification of the snowmobile of VAST. And that's what I got out of it, that it was for electrification of snow machines. It was for electrification of these groomers, and that it just didn't make sense to a lot of people why we would be trying to spend $1 million at this time. And how that got derailed, I don't know. But I can, you know, you're always careful in this to make any assurances of any way, shape, or form. But we are behind the 8 ball a little bit on this. But had this presentation been like this the first time, I think it might have been a little bit.
So the House committee was in favor. They put it in, right? The
Yes.
House, when it came to the floor, was there any discussion?
Appropriations took it up.
But when it came back to the floor,
After
I was wondering if there was a debate about trying to put it back in. I'm trying to get some history about it. We got the House committee members, House chair and vice chair coming in tomorrow. We'll ask them those questions. But I'm just trying to get the background of what happened.
Sure. Yeah, my understanding is that there was no discussion on the floor. We certainly weren't alerted. You know, Frank's been in the State House and he's probably watching right now. But that there was no communication. And I think that the electrification issue, you know, that's a totally separate issue, and it definitely got muddled. It did sort of in-house. It didn't get as derailed as it did in Senate transportation. And so, because again, I wasn't really sure why I was coming in that day, but it is a completely separate issue. Absolutely.
Where's Jane? Did Jane?
She has an appointment.
No, but I know.
I think
So on the issue,
On the issue,
I think that she thought it was for electrification, and we just couldn't wrap our heads around. I couldn't wrap my head around it.
we had the other $1 million that is for electrification.
Right.
ATVs, snowmobiles, so there might be some confusion there, but
I think that's what it was. I don't think it was Jeannie's. I don't think Jeannie knew either.
Okay.
I really.
I know, you know, that's why I want this discussion with you today, to try to find what's happened in the past before we get into this.
And we'll hear more from the House tomorrow, or tomorrow, Wednesday, but yeah, tomorrow, I think. But just so we have a good knowledge of what's going on, why it was taken out by appropriations.
And sorry, Cindy, I think you said this at the beginning, but I already forgot that it wasn't the governor's recommend, or this discussion with you and the administration happened after the governor's budget was released?
No, it was before. I reached out to the governor in November. So it was before, it was while they were starting or working on his budget was when the original conversation happened.
Was it in the governor's budget?
Yes. Yeah, it's in the governor's budget. Both that and the 50,000 for law enforcement were both in the governor's budget. I reached out to, like I said, to them in November. And the other thing too is I know it was brought up last week about a registration increase, and why we didn't just ask for a registration increase to help us with this. It's not the right time. Half of our members are Vermonters, and this is a very expensive sport, and it's getting more expensive. And it's not because of us. We do charge more than surrounding states, but we have a better product, and we're also run a little bit differently because we're not a state agency. And it's not that much. We haven't lost a bunch of members or anything. In fact, we've actually been increasing a little bit every year, but the Vermont side of it has not increased. And these are also our volunteers. So a lot of these folks are low income. They can't afford a brand new snowmobile. Snowmobiles start at about $11,000. It's a lot of money.
What's the registration now?
It's $36.
But I know, I'm sorry, I'm just kind
Go ahead.
of, but it's not just that, because I mean, by the time that you get your sled and you pay all your TMAs and all that stuff, you're looking at $500 or $600
Absolutely.
to get that sled on the trail. So it's not just of that. It's I mean, and then you go when you want to go snowmobiling, you pull that cord, it's $50. I mean, to get it to even go for a half a day. So it's expensive.
Absolutely, it is. I mean, our passes, we charge anywhere from about $120 up to close to $300 for a season pass. So it depends on if you're registered in Vermont or not, because we need to capture that money. That when people register their snowmobiles in Vermont, the majority of that money comes back to VAST. If you register outside of Vermont, you can still ride here, but your trail pass is going to be more expensive because we're not capturing that registration money. So Senator Ingalls, you're absolutely correct. It's about $500 just to get your machine going. You have to have insurance on it. Has to be registered. You have to have a trail pass. You have to have a safety course if you're born before a certain time. And then, of course, all the mechanics and fixing and buying the machines and things like that.
Go ahead, Senator.
So I heard you say half your members are Vermonters. As somebody that can't get votes from out-of-staters, I definitely support you increasing the assessment on out-of-staters that are a part of your membership. And I'd be curious if that is a way, if it doesn't come to $1 million, but comes to $500,000 or $300,000 or something, if you can just soak the out-of-staters. The other thing I'd say is I am generally more supportive of this, much more so than the $1 million for e-bike incentives. So I don't know how that factors into this, but this is something that I think would directly contribute to a stronger Vermont economy for recreational tourism and for the federal matching. That if the dollars from the e-bike thing had to go anywhere, I'd support it going here.
Thank you, Senator. I will say that half of those, more than half of those out-of-staters own property in the state of Vermont. So they already pay much higher. They already pay much higher taxes because they don't vote. You know, and I know that that's an argument you hear all the time, but it's the truth. But they pour a lot of money into this economy. And it's also very easy for the other ones just to say, well, the heck with you, we'll just go to New Hampshire.
And they do.
And they do.
Yeah,
So,
they do. I battle that all the time up there in the Essex County, as far as whether they're going to stay on this side or go in New Hampshire. So
and for full disclosure, I was not a snowmobiler before I took this job 8 years ago. My background is association management. So, and I fell in love with the sport, and I have a complete understanding of who these people are now that I didn't know before. I always knew that VAST had something to do with snowmobiling, but I was absolutely a non-motorized downhill skier. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people that host these trails and that work on these trails, these thousands of volunteers. So any help that you can provide me, I'm just very, very grateful.
I'm sorry, Senator Kitchell had some medical issues with her husband this morning, but I wish you'd have been here. It's a good conversation. We've got to get her caught up on this because I think there's a lot of questions that she has too. So if you have the chance, or I will talk to her, or the committee will discuss some of these things with her. We just want you to have a fair shot at it, because we were kind of surprised. Appropriations took it out. We didn't know what had happened.
I really appreciate that. I can send her the sound. We can figure out in the recording and narrow that down and send it to her as well.
Yeah. Sarah,
I was trying to be somewhat humorous about the out-of-state piece, but if you look at organizations that are subsidized by the state, like University of Vermont, we have a differential for in-state tuition for out-of-staters because we want to support those that are funding the property taxes or the taxes that end up going to that institution. So I just plant that seed that charging even $10 more for your out-of-staters just to get to where you need to be. I think is fair. If you're going to get $1 million from the state of Vermont, that Vermonters could in part be to keep Vermont fees down.
Charge out of state bus riders.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I didn't think that you were being flip or anything about it. I mean, it's true. I said my background's association management. I worked for 3 different chambers of commerce in this state, including the Lake Champlain Regional Chamber, for 25 years. So I totally understand, what you guys do and the importance of people that visit this state.
You do a good job.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
So do you.
is the registration amount set by VAST or is it set by DMV, like other vehicle registrations?
It's set by DMV and then the legislature. Anytime that, there's a fee bill, which I don't think that there's a fee bill.
Just
there
like
was
all other vehicle fees, the snowmobile's the same.
Yeah, there was an increase already 3 or 4 years ago, a registration increase.
$36, you said?
Yes.
That's quite a bit. I mean, a car is only 76. So, I mean, that's quite a bit, half the price of a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the input this morning, and we certainly will keep you informed if we need more information or what's going on, because we're just playing catch up on this one. I didn't know a lot about it. I thank you for the.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Thank you for coming back in and clarifying.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so very much. And thank Senator Mitchell for me too.
Season almost over, or is it still going?
No, we're done.
You're done for the season. It's all over.
I'm already thinking about my garden.
That you have control of, right?
Right.
Well,
Thank you all.
again. Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.